So MTV News has joined the culture war in a big way, and of course they have many different connections, MTV with the mainstream media and of course with the social media companies, and they are evidently calling for the elimination of all hate speech, quote unquote, from these social media companies. They say that social media has a very giant hate speech problem, a growing hate speech problem, and these companies need to do something right now. So we're going to go through that story. They mentioned a whole bunch of different attacks that have happened, of course, when referencing certain YouTube channels and potential growing radicalization on YouTube, which has been completely debunked. Of course, they reference the Data and Society report that has been debunked, that refers to people that don't even have YouTube channels on top of that. And then, of course, we're going to show you the Medium article once again that debunks the Data and Society report. But I think that this MTV News article just goes to show you that we have a grim future ahead for free speech on the internet, where 90% of the conversations happen today in America. Let's get into all of that right now. But first, this video is kindly sponsored by My Patriot Supply. Now, I'm not a guy that's going to tell you it's all going to soon come to an end. Get to your bunker and start prepping. But I will tell you that having at least a month's supply of dry food for you and your family is probably a good idea. A localized natural disaster is probably the most likely. However, the dollar collapsing or an EMP or something similar can happen. So if you want to stock up on dried food storage, visit preparewithvincent.com today to get $100 off of a 4-week food supply that has a 25-year shelf life. We all probably stock up on ammo. Make sure to stock up on food too, just in case. So here's the tweet from MTV News. The elimination of hatred from our mainstream is not intolerance, a threat to free speech, nor oppressive political correctness. It is a necessary rebuke of our society's violent white supremacy. Now, just in case there are people watching that could potentially have their minds changed, of course, we're not going to show these statistics in the hopes that people at MTV News will change their mind, or some of these establishment types may change their mind, because they know exactly what they're doing. They know the statistics. They know the truth, but they don't want to push the truth. They don't want to tell the truth. I mean, a recent example, of course, is Russia collusion. Another recent example, of course, is the Covington Catholic kids. But the truth of the matter is, just for those who might be watching this today that could potentially have an open mind, white supremacy is not on the rise. White nationalism is not on the rise. It is not a giant threat to America, as they might tell you. And actually, as a matter of fact, this article, as we get into it, goes on to point to the SPLC and refer to the SPLC, who recently fired their co-founder, and their president recently resigned because of quote-unquote racism and sexism happening. Twitter dropped them as their trusted flaggers on their corporation, but they referenced the SPLC, and the SPLC recently released a hate map about a year ago or so. This is something that I reference quite often. And just know this, while looking at this hate map, just know that we recently had a hearing on white nationalism, and as you can see, the white nationalists, as they call them, are much smaller than the black nationalists and the black separatists. Even though white people make up 62% of the population and black Americans only make up 13% of the population. So I'm not sure that white supremacy, if anything, or white nationalism, if anything, is something that we should be focusing on this country. I think that we should be focusing on actual real issues, not conspiracy theories as MTV News and many pundits are pushing. But let's get into this article here. Social media has a hate speech problem. Why won't companies do something about it? It says the March 15th terrorist attack on both the Al Noor Mosque and the Linwood Islamic Center in Christchurch, New Zealand was the deadliest shooting in the nation's history, and an act of white supremacist violence engineered to inflict maximum pain on the Muslim community and go viral in the process. Now, one thing they don't mention is, of course, the church in Tennessee where a black man walked into the church and shot up a white church. He said in retaliation to Dylan Roof. They're not going to mention that. They're not going to mention the story of the man saying he wanted to kill a white people, proceeded to kill 6 white people. They're not going to mention the story in this article of the man who threw the boy off of the balcony at the Mall of America. No, they're going to only cherry pick stories to further make you believe in their narrative that they're pushing of this rise of white nationalism that isn't even true, according to data and statistics that we have seen. We know this in part because it was later revealed prior to the attack that the shooter allegedly uploaded a 73-page manifesto linked out on Twitter that was heavily coded with references to obscure memes, low-quality trolling, and odd racist irony called shitposting. Very interesting that they said that it's low-quality memes, because he got the entire mainstream media to do exactly what he was calling on them to do, to censor political opinions. And he got you to write this article to call for censoring of political opinions. Not only that, he tricked the media, a lot of the media, into believing that PewDiePie was a promoter of this guy, and that wasn't just a shit-posting meme, essentially. It says, let's be clear, white supremacy is violence. While various groups claim different titles, there is no version of white supremacy that comes without the violent erasure of minorities, and the legacy of white supremacy is the proof. But the intention to destroy those considered non-white is not just a matter of historical reflection. Today, there is a steady rise in white supremacist violence and a rise in hate crimes against marginalized groups, and the reality that 100% of extremist mass murders committed last year came at the hands of far-right zealots and white supremacists. So there is a lot in that paragraph that is completely untrue. And of course, I'm not going to convince the writer of this article. Of course, I'm not going to convince the elites, the mainstream media elites who are pushing this narrative, constantly trying to make it be true, just like Russia collusion. But there is a lot of fake news just in that one paragraph alone. There's a steady rise in white supremacist violence. Okay, so first of all, we look at the hate map by the SPLC, which this article references later on, and you can see that that's actually not the case. The black separatist movement has tens of thousands of more members, more than any of these other groups combined. Not only that, the hearing on white nationalism was about this group, and yet we have this group that exists and is much larger, double the size, while only making up 13% of the population. And then it goes on to talk about a rise in hate crimes. Well, first of all, they redefined the definition of hate crimes. So there was a slight rise from 2016 to 2017, but only by a couple of hundred, actually. Most hate crimes that we know of are actually fake. If you go to fakehatecrimes.org, you can check out all the different articles that have never been retracted by mainstream media pundits about all the fake hate crimes that were perpetrated by the ones who were supposed to be the victim of the actual crime. Number one. Number two, once again, and I'm going to keep repeating this until it gets through as many minds as I can possibly reach. We look at the statistics from the 2016 hate crimes report by the FBI, and we can see that per 100,000 black Americans, they commit a higher rate of hate crimes than the per 100,000 rate of white Americans. This means that based on the math of this, you will get more hate crimes perpetrators in the black community than you will in the white community when you take 100,000 black Americans and 100,000 white Americans. In 2017, Germany passed the Network Enforcement Act to ensure that social media sites with at least 2 million German users were upholding national laws against hate speech, which were implemented as a post-Holocaust measure, because Germany does not want abusive content sitting online on social media sites to be consumed by their citizens. So they go on right from saying that the government can't control private entities to saying that the government should control private entities, of course, if they're denying the Holocaust or denying the numbers. And they go on to reference the 2017 Germany Network Enforcement Act. You see how the narrative kind of shifts and shakes a little bit, going from, we can't support the government interfering in private businesses unless it's to make sure that you get paid $15 to $20 an hour, unless it's about dumping waste, unless it's Germany saying that you're going to be taken down if you question the numbers of a particular genocide, right? So there they go on to do that. Milo Yiannopoulos for targeting black female actress Leslie Jones, which is completely false, by the way. Alex Jones, who violated their abusive policy behavior, which was completely exposed in the Joe Rogan podcast, where Joe Rogan and Tim Pool laughed in the face of Vidya and Jack Dorsey when they gave the reason why Alex Jones was banned and not, people who were literally calling for violence. Of course, this writer doesn't want the people literally calling for violence if they're on the left against the Covington Catholic kids banned, because that's okay, that's encouraged. But as far as like Alex Jones goes, yeah, he definitely needs to be banned for some very vague, very shifty and shaky reasons there. And then they go on to talk about the Amnesty International study, Data and Society study, which they quote and say that YouTube is radicalizing the youth, which we know has been debunked. I mean, we've been misled about politically incorrect YouTube. And this person who wrote this article, Mark Ledwich, went on to create his own study and analyze the data that Data and Society come up, claiming that people are being radicalized on YouTube, mentioning people that don't even have YouTube channels in a lot of cases. And he determined that actually more recommendations for the left wing pops up in people's YouTube main home screens than for the right wing. Number one. Number two, the algorithm for YouTube itself is based on trying to keep you watching. So if I watch a video about guns, for instance, I'm going to be recommended more videos about guns. If my interest is in, let's say, woodworking, I'm going to be recommended many different videos, many different channels on woodworking. That's how the algorithm works. So if you're watching right-wing pundits, if you're watching conservative pundits, if you're watching PragerU or Steven Crowder or Stefan Molyneux or Rebel Media or whatever the case may be, you're going to be recommended more creators that share their belief systems. But not only that, this whole thing about radicalization and recommending white supremacist content has been completely debunked by actual statistical analysts. And this particular study that he did, this counter study to Data and Society, which the mainstream media keeps referencing, by the way, even though it's been debunked, just like they keep referencing stories and sources, even though the Trump-Russia collusion was debunked and many other fake news stories that they've talked about, they just keep doing this. And you can see that actually more recommendations for left-wing YouTubers pop up than for right-wing YouTubers in this particular report. And you can go to this Medium article up here to check this out, left versus right and center. But this writer of this article, of course, is posing with Maxine Waters on his Twitter timeline. So, I mean, you can see that there's an agenda there. There's certainly an agenda there, and he has no idea what he's talking about whatsoever. Videos are posted every single day here about breaking news topics, so make sure you hit the bell button if you haven't already so that you are notified. Check the description for links to Patreon and PayPal, and of course follow me on Gab, Minds, BitChute, and Instagram. Links in the description as well. And of course these videos only go so far, so be sure to share with family and friends.